Alright, welcome to another edition of Gearbox Garage. Today, I had a customer who brought me in a Cherokee, and he's got 250,000 plus miles on it, and he's got definitely an issue with hydraulics. You can see here, you can see on the outside there's oil and everywhere coming from down from the valve covers and the rear main seal and everything. But in this scenario, you can see that the brake cleaner has actually cleaned off all the grime, and that way you know that slave, even though it was an external, that was what was leaking. And he knew something was leaking because he was having to add fluid, but he said he couldn't see anything underneath the dash, so he just assumed it was that. But once that was happening, he was having a hard time getting it into gear, and he had changed the fluid out because he didn't know what it was, and put in Pennzoil synchro mesh, which is one of the ones that I use. And so basically, we've got high mileage unit. As you can see, with this type of this orange silicone, this unit has never been opened, so I figured it might be worthy. And it's a later model. One, because it's a 94, but also because this is a 3/4 inch input shaft, and the early ones had one that was about 5/8 of an inch right here. You can see the difference on that right there, so you can see that the difference on that, and that was pretty much the basic. But I'm just going to be popping it apart, and you can kind of see what I do to get them apart, and then once we get it case split, we can look at the gears and kind of see what we're at. More than likely, well, I know for certain we're getting an OEM bearing kit, which has the Japanese Nachi and Koyo seals, and then we're also going to be using new synchronizers from that kit. They're all new bearings, all new seals, all new gaskets. And we'll bust this thing apart real quick and see what we got. And you probably, well, maybe not. I was going to say it might be getting bumpy, but I got it mounted up there, so maybe it'll stay fairly smooth. On these, there's two different, when it's not been into, you have two different tensions. One is softer, and both of these feel about the same. Normally, the heavy one's on this side, and the softer of the two is on that side. This here is one of those things that, if you're not careful, you can actually put in backwards, and then you won't have second, fourth, or reverse, because the diameter of this rod, it basically gets, just put it in backwards, it's too long, and it bottoms out against this plate here. So easiest way that I tell, or I do it, is when I pull them apart, I will grab my snap ring pliers, and there's a hole in the back of that plug that you can reach in and get out. So no hole. So if you set it like this, you can see that from here to here is shorter than from here to here. So if you put it in backwards, when you go to shift, it'll bottom out against this plug, so you don't get second and fourth. And if you catch it pretty quick, even if it's after in the vehicle, I just have to drop the transfer case, take this plug out, switch them out, and move on. And if you happen to be an early model with the internal slave, and you wanted to switch over to the external, you have to take this front bearing retainer off and swap it out. And so when you get a bell housing and the clutch fork, you will also need this front bearing retainer. God dang it, it's cheap. It's not a big deal as long as you're aware and you make sure your unit's clean and empty, and then you won't run into too many issues because they are the same. It's just, they're the same here. It's just that the internal slaves, all that's cut off. So, and when you do that, you're basically looking at this when you pop them apart. No matter if it's original or if it's not, you're still going to have to clean off all this gasket, clean all this other stuff up, clean off, you know, the back of there. I spray it down with alcohol, wipe it until the rags are clean, both pieces, because it'll kind of pull out the oil that gets saturated into this metal, and then you can put the AX15 used to come with gaskets, but about 10-15 years ago something happened and they don't have a gaskets for them no more. AX5 you can still get them, but not on the AX15. So I use silicone, and I only use ultra gray and ultra black. Black I usually use for like rear ends. In this scenario, if you're doing it, you would do black because it's probably going to be oily, and it seems to work a little bit better on an oily surface. When it's clean, I use the gray, and I try to put just enough so that it squeezes just a tiny bit out. Or, you know, normally you'd want it where you can put it on and then let it dry just a tiny bit and then tighten it down so that you don't get any squeezing out. But if it's too big, you can create issues, or too much, you can create issues as well. Here I'm just taking the snap rings off of the front two bearings. I use a pick to get behind it. I can lift it off. And I would show you, but if I stand it up, then it loads that front bearing. So just a pick, anything, and then so that front's done, and then we've got that. So now we're taking out the main bolts here. And I will say, if you take these out and they look like this. This is one that was a stud, and usually they just come right out, but you can see that it rusted up. And this was inside on the bottom of the AX5, and I'm sorry, it was in like this, and this was sticking out, and the bolt broke off, and I had to drill and tap and try to get and do all of that. It was like 2 hours to get all that out of there just to break loose enough. But if you get this type of corrosion, you need to check your grounds. There's a chance that your especially on like an automatic, the front pump bearing or front pump bushing will be pitted, and that'll be from basically trying to find a ground somewhere. So if you're ever welding on the vehicle, you definitely want to take the battery loose because you don't want to be able to send current through the system and through the frame or whatever, and actually have a arcing of the negative side. Alright. Alright, so now we got that apart. And what I do, I hate freaking dirt everywhere. you'll see these little notches. I use those so that, and whenever I'm prying or trying to pop stuff apart, if you imagine this is 12 o'clock, the bottom 6 and 3 and 9, I never do anything below the 3 and 9. That way, if you actually gouge any type of this and don't catch it, either you have to clean it because it's a high spot, or you got a low spot, and now you got to fill it with silicone and make sure it don't leak. So what I do is I try to get it right here on the outside and just give it a little pop. Make sure I don't miss a bolt somewhere. Usually it just pops right off like that, and that'll put enough pressure that you can gently get that off. And the first thing I do is I check for this oiler, and I'll show you what the, it sits here. It sits there in the unit, and as it, the transfer case input's coming through here, so it's sealed off. So as it's throwing oil everywhere, it kind of falls here, runs right down into this, runs out of this tube, which sits here. I'll show you in a second. And then it basically oils the fifth gear bearing. And these are super cheap. They're like $7, $10. And then the bearing, there's a couple upgrades on the AX5, on the AX15. Just make sure if you happen to buy a build kit, you're getting a good quality bearing. There was a time where I was having a hard time finding the bearings, and I would buy kits from different places on eBay and this and that, and some of them they'd come in and they'd be rusty, and I'm like, why would you even send me this? You're wasting my time, because you're getting it back. And they're like, oh, our builders don't mind. Well, good, I'll give you some extras here. And have it back for them. So here I'm not really prying. It's already open. I'm just trying to get those like that. And then that slides off. So you got you're gonna have your drain pan, or your drain area right there, which is full of that. So I always take that out before I clean everything up, because every single time you go to clean up something and then it's got a magnet full of metal, it just all of a sudden makes everything a mess. So I get that out. And you can see, they're all going to have metal. And so you can see that's just fine metal. And this one's being as old as it is. I can tell from the color of this one that it hasn't had a heat issue. I don't even know if I've got any. I don't think I have any, but when they get older, they turn more of an orange color. So here, we've got that clean, working in here. Normally, you don't really have any issues with in the front bell housing, or front half housing. I've got a stack of them over there. There's about 6 of them, 7 of them that I'm taking to the scrap yard, because in 20 some odd years, I don't know that I've ever had one that I had to replace. So me holding on to 7 or 10 of them, not counting those, is stupid, but I still keep them. And then in the rear, the same thing. The only thing I do back there is I go ahead and pop the seal out while it's right there. The seal also will show you on the inside if it's all bubbly. I don't know if we have anything. If it's all bubbly, you can tell that it's gotten hot, but in this scenario it hasn't. So these will set off to the side. Actually, I gotta get water, so we'll set that here. That one I gotta pull the seal out. Wash that too. Most of the dirt is now off the table, so we'll just have basically clean fluid. If I get the dirt now picked up now, it's less than I got later to deal with. Alright. So now basically we're at the position where when you're buying a AX15, you'd like to be able to see this point, because there's not going to be many surprises that you can that you'll run into if you could physically see this point, which obviously you have to split, but that's how I buy my cores. If they want more than 150 bucks for a core, then I said, well, I'll pay you more, but we gotta open it up. So let me prop this up so we can kind of show you the basics of what I look for. That should be pretty good right there. All right, so what we're looking for, we know we got high mileage, so we know that we're going to have, all the bearings are going to be bad. Normally you'll have no wobble on these bearings here. Now this one's a little bit different style. It's these are cage bearings with a regular style. This is a little bit different, but this one should have none. And you can see, and even that right there, I mean, we're probably moving 12 thousandths of an inch. That's wore out. That will make a noise. That will allow everything kind of to work like an accordion. Now this bearing should be the worst of all bearings, because anytime the engine's running, technically the clutch will be out, which this will be turning. This could be turning, but this is your typical brake is right there. So you'll have pieces and parts moving. So some of them will wear out like fifth gear. If you got bigger tires, you probably don't even use fifth gear, so it should be in great shape. So first thing I'm looking for is discoloration. I've got another unit that of all the broken parts, I made a visual unit for my customers. And here you can see, if you put the wrong input in, you can blow this apart, because you can see that one looks like it's fairly new. If you run them low on oil, it can get so hot that that metal actually will turn to liquid, and it rolls over. Here, these are pitted, and you can see, you might be able to see, there's pitting on right there and there. First gear is the same way, but those, you're going to have a gear whine, and eventually it'll chip the teeth. And then fifth gear, it's the same thing back there. But you can, when it comes to here, you can see this got hot, so it changed the actual color, of this gear. So anytime you see a discoloration, you know that it's gotten hot, and you know you're going to have a problem in that area. So in this scenario, this thing looks good. I mean, this would be a great core. I wouldn't, right off the bat with a bell housing, be an external, and this setup, I'd pay probably 250 bucks for this core, because I know there's nothing that's got hot. Now you might have wear, and we'll be covering that in a minute. But first thing you can't really check this ring, because this moves back and forth. So we're going to check this one. Now this is first gear, second gear, third gear, fourth, or the input, and then fifth is back here. This idler comes against this outer ring to give you reverse. So what we don't want is this ring, and you might not be able to see too much, but you can see that there's a gap between this face of this ring and the face of that gear right down in here. We want to always have that gap. I can show you on a new piece here in a minute, up a little up close. So the first thing I check is I'll take two pieces to get on this ring, and I'm going to push it backwards. If it goes back like that, it goes, it goes almost back. I mean, there's a tiny gap there, but that one is probably 80% wore out. And they all will be that same way. You won't normally have one gear or one synchro that's more than another, unless you have an issue with, like I said, this fork wears weird, or if because the bearing's acting like an accordion, it kind of breathing, if you go to shift this forward or backwards, it can overstroke and it can come apart, and then you're stuck in between gear. I can show you that in a bit too. So at this point, we're basically, I can see what I've seen, everything, there's no discoloration, and we know we've got high mileage, so we knew we're going to have synchronizers. And now we'll finish taking it apart. Now early and late on these, different as well. And the difference is this diameter down inside here, which will also change when it comes to whether it's the steel forks or the This is an AX5, as you can see. Once you put it down in there, it wobbles because that hole and that shoulder are not the same size. So you got to be aware if most of the time you won't run into a problem because you won't be mismatching parts, but just in case you are, you got to be aware there are quite a few differences, and you pretty much got to get screwed over quite a few times before you realize what they all are. As you can also see, there's green Loctite on them. So these have never been out. That's what happens when from the factory. Might not be able to see. And on this scenario here, you have 4 big springs and 4 check balls in those locations. And now all of those, I still got 2 snap rings to get out, and they're rather pain in the ass. But I'm spinning this because of all the tools I have. Damn you, gloves. All the tools I don't have one. To get snap rings off that are spring clip. I've made tools over the years, and they work until they're a couple of uses, and then they don't work anymore. Damn it! So what I do is I take a rag, I put underneath, so that when it comes flinging off, it'll hit that rag and not bounce all over the shop. Early on, I'd clean my shop, and there'd be snap rings and ball bearings, everything all over the place. So I put basically it's a round C-clip that expands and snaps on. I'm putting the screwdriver right on those edges. Basically, it's sitting. So I got that one right on that tooth, and you want to do this in one shot. So you get it like that, and then what I'm doing is just hit it like that, get it off. That way, it does the least amount of damage on that tip. Some of the early AX5s, Jesus. Some of the early AX5s had issues with 5th gear, and as long as you fix, if you're rebuilding, as long as you know what the issue is, there's fixes for everything. And on these, I always put a rag over top of it, usually customers here, that way I don't have flying debris. Also, there are some early units out there that don't have these holes in this 5th gear, and those are a pain in the ass. You got a customer sitting right there in front of you, and you got to take it apart by basically force, and you're hoping you don't break anything. I used to have good gloves, these here, orange gloves, and I could put one pair on and then work till lunchtime, take the pair off, go eat lunch, come back, put them back on, and use them the rest of the day. And then COVID happened, and then that company felt that instead of them being $17 for 50, they were worth don't know, I think they're $60 or some stupid ass like that now. And I'm not going to buy it from them. Basically boycott them. So here we can see, you can see there's a tiny gap in between there. But you can also see how much of this face of that fifth gear sticking out. So normally you'd want that almost flush there, and you'd almost have about that much. So you're probably looking at 1/8 of an inch, 3/16 of an inch versus 1/16 of an inch. So that ring is completely shot. I have to save it so I can show the customer. And sometimes this is bad. And you wouldn't think it's bad, but it's this bevel. And the only way you'll know if it's good or bad, you take a new ring, and here you can kind of see how there's a tiny bit there. And I have a bunch of rings, so I check every ring for starting at the most important gear. Most important gear is first, then second, then third, then fifth, then fourth. Because fourth is 1-to-1, so it's already at that thing, so it doesn't take much movement or much slowing down. So you can see there, that's what it should look like. You got buried a little bit there. The other thing that we look for, or I look for, is the teeth. And I can't clean it with a towel because you get lint on it. So basically I blew it off, but the very top of these teeth is basically a pyramid. It's the side of the gear is what holds the slider onto this gear. It's cut so that forces it on even farther. But the shifting aspect is this point right here. And it's the same type of a point that you would have on here. Alright? So it's a lot of times if you have an in-play issue, these will be just beat all to hell, but the fit will be fine, but the face of them is messed up. And what you're basically doing is when you shift, you're moving this ring onto this gear, because it's moving faster or at least a different rate, and then when more pressure, it'll slow it down till they're lining up, and then this inside teeth of this slider will be able to slide right on. I'll show you that in a second. And I had to put that back in neutral so that this thing would come out. You normally don't have any issues with the shift rail unless it's pitted from rust. And then once you get the fork open or off, you're going to look to make sure that from this edge here over, there's no wear. It doesn't, because if there's any wear, here you can start to see that you can see the discoloration. You can't feel anything, but you can see. So this will be basically worn down. If this happens, there's no way to get that back, and you eventually have a shifting issue. So you want to go ahead and replace that fork. They're fairly inexpensive if you catch them. Now this second shift rail actually has a small interlocking pin in it that you gotta be aware of. These I've never had any. I got a bucket out there. There's probably 50 or 60 of these. They never go bad, and as far as I know, there's not even any differences in them. Now we come back to the other two little snap rings that are down in here, and these are the ones that are a little more pain because everything's spinning. And I just basically force that around, till it's at the top, like that. Basically setting that one on that one, that one on that one, hold it, and just hold it over top of it, and just kind of give it a good little whack. Camera's on, we're going to do it 30 times. And no, I haven't figured out a better way. I made a tool once. work out. This one also has an interlocking pin. It rides in that little hole right there. Like so, and I put a dab of grease in there to hold everything. This one. I usually do it before I take the damn springs and balls out. Take those out so it has a little tension holding them rails. That's what it looks like. Now we pull this one out. Check this fork. So we're good there. They don't normally have an issue in here. Now I will say that some of these for third gear, if you get a new fork, they'll have these nodules on them, and there was a time where they were too tall. You can see it's just a tiny, I mean it ain't much, but it'll prevent you going into fourth gear if you put that on and then and don't catch it. This one actually is inside, so we have to check it against this. So you can, let's see if I can show you. You can drop that like this, and we're watching it back and forth. And there's a little bit of play on that one, but once again, you can usually, if there's wear, you can feel it. So if you stick your pick in there and it's smooth all the way across, then that amount of play will be factory. It can't wear it evenly because it's not on it 100%. Now, once we're at this point, we can pull off fifth gear. I usually lift up and down on that, slide that out. This is one of the parts that's almost always replaced. And this one actually, I would have lost money on that one. Yeah, no, it's bad. That tiny little bit right there won't normally have wear on this side. It'll all be right here. And that one almost might be able to clean up, but more than likely, because they're so inexpensive, I end up changing those out anyway. So earlier, talking about the oiler sits inside here and it catches the oil and runs it down. And the reason it runs it down is so that it can come out this hole. Well, it rides like this, and so you have these bearings that are basically sitting right there. So this oiler feeds that bearing. These bearings always get changed, only because, one, they're inexpensive, but the main thing is, if you put a used bearing on that, like this one's got 200-something thousand miles, and it messes up this journal, you have to replace the entire counter shaft. So a $15 bearing and a $10 oiler messes up a $180 counter shaft. So if that's in good shape, which these are, because there's no discoloration and there's no any wear marks on that, then we know that counter shaft should be good because we don't have any other discoloration down through there. Now this being fifth gear, we've got, we're basically looking on the back side here for wear. You can kind of see where the discolor or the wear marks, but it's smooth. And then we take that off, and then we're looking inside. And you're basically looking at all of them. Make sure there's nothing inside. If these bearings go bad, they start to kind of move around, and then they'll chitter chat inside here and make a pattern, and then that will be bad. Also on fifth gear, there's other. You're going to look at these splines. You're looking at this face, and then you're looking at the gears, making sure you don't have any rust or anything. So that one's good. This is the. They are the what do you call them? I call them the snap ring and keys. I think they actually have some. They're for your detent, so that gives you when you're shifting, it pops it back into neutral and pull it into gear. On these, you're looking for any discoloration or wear patterns on the face. Those are in good shape. Now these, since it's got bigger tires, normally they're bad. These are the softer metals in the actual gears, and it's so that it can actually wear. So here we're going to be looking for those nice, clean, sharp teeth. And normally, it's pretty obvious because you've got darker color everywhere, and then you have these little shiny points right on top. Basically it's a pyramid or a mountain, and you get like, silver spots that kind of stick out. This one's okay, and then the other thing that we're looking for is down inside here. Surprisingly, that one's in good shape, but probably because they have a too high a gear ratio. Well, he's got 307s, and he's wanting to go to 350 or 456s, but let's get the training fix first. And then I'll take these last 4 bolts here. AX5, they're Torx head, and those get Loctite because they always back out. And you can't have too long of a bolt. It has to be the right size. If you have it too long, it'll actually stick through the case and hit the back of that first gear, and you will have some noise if you try to drive it like that. Alright. So we got one more snap ring. I'd already thrown something for these damn gloves. And they're pointless. I was given a bunch of these, is why I'm burning through them, but I would never buy much. I think these are actually from Sam's. These are junk. I mean, they're great if you're going to be doing cooking or something, but they have them. The customer gave me a whole bunch of them. They do not work long. Alright, so now this is how I do this next part. It's going to be a little noisy, but you can hold that and gently tap this down. And then set everything down. Now there are a few more pieces inside here that we need to get out. They haven't fallen out already. And these are interlocking pins. Basically, when you shift one shift rail, it prevents any of the other shift rails to move. Alright, so here, this bearing is the countershaft bearing, and that's what I was saying earlier. Some of these are not necessarily the same. Here you can see how this bearing is just about ready to fall out, and sometimes you can bounce them. And that's got a lot of mileage on it to be able to flop around like that. And then this one, now that we've got the countershaft out, basically this area where 5th gear rides, bearing rides, and then we're looking for teeth chipping. And you can kind of see a little bit. Now on these, they're always a pain, and I found that if you take a hammer and a punch and basically drive the center race down before you try taking that snap ring off, the snap ring has a little bit more room and it comes off easier, because little things like these will fight you, and you don't want to miss. You don't want it coming on and off, or you'll mess up those teeth and then it'll be a pain to get on. So we'll use the press to get that off. So now we're down to the main shaft. So here we can go ahead and separate the input. Immediately we're looking at the input bearing. It's nice color, so all that won't be an issue. So we'll clean that up, make sure there's no pitting, and it's nice and clean. And then here we can now start to see how much life is left on that one. And because it's 1-to-1 ratio, typically this will have the least amount of wear. And this one technically is, like I said, 80% or so worn out. And then same thing, we're looking at those teeth there. Those look pretty good. That has to be pressed off. Now I'll clean everything up and blow everything off, so there's no oil, there's no mud anywhere, and that way I can make sure that what parts are good and what are bad before if I have to order something. This one is a larger snap ring, and it has a ton of force behind it, so it bounces around pretty good. So be aware. Oh, I missed that one. Almost hit my finger. Okay. Sometimes these will slide off. If it's got crap in there, it won't. But this slides onto the splines like this. I keep moving around. This has splines like this, so it slides on. This has a spot that actually just presses on like any of these would. And then first gear, there's a washer down there. But I put up my tool here and I press that whole section off. It's going to be over there, so you won't be able to see me do it because it's a pain to move the camera around. So we'll take that one off. Now this one is one that you might have, if you spring this open, this metal is a spring metal or spring steel, and so that it'll hold the original position, but when you spring it open, you can get it off and then it'll close. Sometimes if it's got heat, you'll spring these open and they'll stay open. Then you have to get new snap rings. So any snap ring that works weird, you got to be aware. Now, I don't know how anybody else does these. If it's a clean unit, you should be able to just gently get underneath it. Now, if you put any force, you can break the little teeth off of these gears. So all I'm doing is I'm just trying to put 1 pound of pressure. If it don't come off, then it goes to the press. These kind of suck because you got to jam my tool inside here to get this off, and then here to get this off, because you've got to get, in order to get second gear, you've got to have third gear off. I've never, I build 60 of these a year, and I'd say, 1 in 1,000. Actually, I would say if you get this gear to slide off, that gear is bad, because it is not going to slide off and for whatever reason, it is a mother. You'll hear it kind of going off like a 22 round. So the only way I've found to do those, if third gear doesn't come off with fairly little effort. You know what? Let me check the press. Some bitch is still recording. That's all I need to be talking for an hour. Nobody's over here. All right, good. Let me stop it and restart it. All right. That's 46 minutes of me running my mouth. All right. So, got the snap ring off. And this has to go on like this. Now, back in the day, I bought a 20-ton press from Harbor Freight, and you can do AX5s with it, but the throat isn't big enough for this to pass down through the center of it. So I had to cut and modify it. And since I've got a 50-ton press, and I was using it, because sometimes you need that extra oomph to get that second gear off. But then it got a leak on it, and because it's so damn old, I'm having a hard time finding an O-ring kit. But so what I'm doing is so these here are bearing separators, and the one I got from Harbor Freight it'll work for a couple of times, but then it'll get to the point where and it's too thick down in here, and it's made out of a cheaper metal, so I have to make it a little bit thicker. But what I do in here is basically I'm tightening this up, I'm snugging this down, and this way I'm putting as many teeth underneath those other teeth as possible. And I'm not putting a lot of force on this, but I'm just kind of snugging it down until it's snug like that. And then I flip it over, and then I'm basically gently tapping on the bearing retainer to slide that other piece down. And you get a few hits, and all of a sudden it's loose, so you have to snug it back up. And then I do the other side. And then I go back over here. And about this point where I know I got most of the that passed underneath those teeth, I hit a little bit harder. And then you can see how much it went down. So we tighten that up. This is the only way I found. Usually you can feel when it's about to come off. I ain't got much left, but I always caution on the side of extra precaution to prevent any damage, because I don't want to pay money for something. And you can see that where I was hitting was in like that. So I've got the entire, not just out here on the teeth, but I'm using, you know, as much of that face as I can. And I've never had a damage. These, if you do that and they don't fling apart, they're worthy of getting cleaned up. I clean them all up, and then I'm looking for any type of little black spots, which is basically pitting on those. Same here, like on any other gear. You know, don't have much. I've got a little bit more sticking out, so it's a little bit less farther down. Looking in here, and then looking up here. Now here, I can immediately see. Try to blow some of that oil off. I'll have to clean this one up. This will be iffy, because you can see maybe how it's a little bit larger, and it's not just right there on the tip, it's kind of flatten the tip out, and then what happens is it'll start chipping off these little edges, like that one right there. That one is, hopefully you can see it, that one is actually broken off. So this will be a bad gear just because of those little teeth, because you put a new ring on there, you got to work for a little bit, but what happens is this hub would be bad as well. You put a new hub on a bad gear, then the bad gear is going to mess up the softer hub. So if you've got damage, it's got to be replaced. So this one will have to wash up, and that one might actually be bad. And then here, I always mark them. Later model will have a big and a small. Big one's toward the 4th gear. So basically, when I replace this one, I should have it over there. It won't look like this. It'll still be the same dimension in here, but this piece will be smaller. But what I always do is, I know this is where the snap ring ran. You can see it, but you might not be able to see it after it's cleared. So I just take my pick and I put a mark on it. And that means that when it's back together, I can see my mark, and I know that that side's up. Here's some more of these keys. In this case, I'll be replacing these because, once again, it's spring steel. And then on this scenario, you want it sprung out, so you're forcing it down into these clips instead of it being soft. Those might be able to reuse to clean them up. You can start to see a little bit of discoloration, but there's no, I don't see any wear on them. So, but these I'll put in there, but we'll have to look at those. Now here, we know this is 4th, so that's 4th gear side, which is riding against this. And basically, in between there's a synchronizer, and when it goes on, you get that engagement. So it sits like that, and the torque of the engine and the driving spins it on even harder. So if we've got an issue with those teeth, you'd see it on this one definitely. Now that one's, you can see they're shiny, but they're not really bad. Now this side, I'll bet we'll have broken teeth like the other side. So here it's flat across the top. Like I said, this is softer metal than the other piece, so it's going to show exactly what this showed or more. And then the hub. Now some hubs, instead of having its splines everywhere, they'll have a set of splines, miss 3 or 4, set of splines, miss 3 or 4, and those will actually, with enough time, strip the whole thing out. And I have a couple of them laying around somewhere in my weird bucket, but I don't think I'm gonna move this stuff around. I don't know where that's at right now. Alright, so now we're going to go to reverse. The we're going to flip them over. And basically we got to come in underneath like that. Now this one doesn't have to be tight because we're using the press, but we want to make sure that it's got a little bit of wiggle, but not much. Now, snap ring off. You won't be able to see this part, but I'm basically just pressing it off my press. Be right back. So that came off. All right. So we basically have that setup. Ring, first gear, the little washer, the bearing, and then fifth gear. So the bearing we know is bad. Fifth gear, as long as it's not misshapen or pitted, these will be fine. Washer, same as that other washer. This one's less likely to have wear on it. That's fine. Ring, we know the ring will be bad. It's first gear. Actually, that's pretty good. You can see that you don't really have anything there, and how fat that is. That's a heavy gear, and that's probably 5 pounds, 4 pounds or something. So to put this ring and that bevel on that bevel, slowing that gear down, this is the one that's the most critical. So, I mean, there's 200,000 miles on that ring, but and then we look here, they're nice and clean. Nothing on the inside, nothing there. So that one should be all right. We'll clean those up and double check. Now here we have a snap, our little tiny itty bitty pin, and those I've got a special slot for. And I got a magnetic dish over there, and the only thing that's on it is that one. And that way, when I get done, I look up there and I see one, I know I screwed up, and I gotta pull back apart. So once again, this bearing, should be all right. Now this, we got one snap ring, and then we got to get that off. Now, if y'all are trying to do this on your own, I'm not exactly sure the best way to tell y'all to do it, because I don't know what it was that I'm using. I don't know where it came from. So let me pop those off again. This one's a little bit smaller diameter, so it's not as bad. It'll come off pretty easily. Every time I clean up, snap rings everywhere. they'll fling off. You won't even know where they're at. That's why I try to keep all the old parts recycled so that I don't have them stuff bouncing off into them buckets. Refinement. So here, basically we're just pushing this assembly off, and what I have found is I use this tapered bearing outer erase, and I've had it for so long there's no numbers on it. And the reason I use this is if you take this and set it on there like that, the backside is fairly flat. And this is probably what you would have to do. Just make sure that it's on there and not tight. You want to be able to slide past it. But I don't like doing that because it seems like it has a chance to hit those rings. But that fits perfectly, and I can put the pressure here and I'm pushing it toward the center, and it comes off a little easier. Now this one, you might hear a noise when it pops. Some of them, if they're rusty, that sounds like a damn shotgun going off or a rifle. It goes off so damn. It takes so much pressure. Some of them I've had to heat up and let sit. Some I've had to put in a bucket of mineral spirits to kind of loosen up all the crap just to get it to come apart. The cleaner they are, the easier they come apart. That's definitely certain. So once again, that cleaned up. That's the main shaft. Well, output shaft, main shaft. I think it's mainly called the main shaft. Here we have second gear. We'll have nothing there. We'll have nothing there. Those look pretty good. That one's half its life on that one tore out. And then we got reverse. Now, reverse, once again, I also marked these. It's fairly obvious, but I like, if I go back together and I'm putting it back together and I notice that my marks don't line up, then I know either I put it together wrong or it was put together wrong the first time. So here, we know that this here goes toward first gear. If it was in that assembly, that's the side that you would see. So I marked that side just because this could be flipped either way. And I don't know if there's a difference. I've never tried to mic and measure and see if there is a difference here or there, but I'm just putting it back the way it came. So here we've got the mark side, reverse side. So we know that I got a bucket full of those stuff, so those don't go bad. Your reverse idler is this engagement. So your non-synchronized engagement here is what's going to wear out these teeth and these teeth. So this seems to be a heavier, harder metal. So you're going to have a little bit of a rounding, but that's pretty much what it should look like. You should still have a nice, clean, sharp line there. And then this side, if these teeth, or these teeth, any one of them is bad, you replace everything. Now, since that is this way, this one looks pretty good. I mean, nah, maybe not. I don't know about that one. See, those look good, and those are iffy. So we'll have to clean these. So these three items here are where we're at right now as far as what's going to be possibly bad, unless there's something else that shows itself once I get it clean. But basically, we've got the unit apart. The cases and everything. My parts washer is broken, and it's an old parts washer from I don't know when, 70s or something. And so some of the parts it's impossible to find. So I've got an area that I built out of concrete blocks, and I pressure wash everything, so everything kind of stays in that area. And then I wash everything by hand in the parts washer. But basically, that's where we're at now. That breaks everything down. It gives you a basic idea of what's what we're jumping out at you that's going to be good or bad. And then, but more than likely, these 3 items will be replaced along with all the synchronizers and all the bearings and this thresh washer. And I also got to do the transfer case, so I might even do a video on it since it didn't go too bad. If you have any questions, you can always ask them down below. Hope you all enjoyed.